Man, I appreciate that song so much because I know in my life there has been so many times when I have tried to fix it, figure it out, come up with the answer, come up with the solution, only to have repeated frustration. And then when I turn it over to God, when I say, God, it's yours, God, you figure it out, when I go to Him, just like that song says, it says, that's where my help is coming from, how all of a sudden something's made clear, something clicks, something happens, something moves, a situation is spoken into. So I definitely appreciate that song. Glad to be back with you guys today. I know you can't imagine this, but we were actually somewhere last week where it was colder than this. I know many of you from Georgia just think it couldn't be this much colder anywhere else. But I talked to my dad on New Year's Day. We were in Virginia, and we were coming back on New Year's Day, and he said it was 7 degrees where they were at in Virginia. So just be thankful for your teens and your 20s. While we go through this, it was cold enough today that I did put on socks with my loafers, so that's how cold it is. As 2017 came to a close, I did probably what a lot of you did. I did some self-reflection, some just sort of looking inside, sort of looking back at 2017 and making some assessments, looking forward to 2018 and what I was hoping will happen and be of 2018. And I'm sure many of us did that, and sometimes we do that and we come up with what we call resolutions or maybe goals, and we start the new year seeking to achieve those or seeking to change that habit or change that situation, whatever it might be. And I did the same as probably many of you did. But when I was doing this, I actually started a little earlier back in 2017, and when I was doing this, I found a Christian website, and at the end of the service I'm going to give you that website, but it lets you go in and you answered a bunch of different questions about your life, and it was called a life score assessment. Okay, and so you went in, you answered, it had 10 different parts of your life. It had spiritual, intellectual, emotional, physical, marital, parental, social, vocational, avocational, which I had to check that's hobbies, and financial. It's 10 different areas of your life. You go in and answer a bunch of questions about all these different areas, and then it spits out a number. Now, the top number, the top goal was 120. So if everything was perfect and you got 12s in all your categories, of all 10 categories, you would have a 120. So I did that one day in my office, and I put all the information in, and it spit out a number, and I had a number. I'm not going to tell you what my number was. You tell me your number, I'll tell you my number type of thing. But there were 4 different levels because it took each of the scores. And one level was struggling. One level was frustrating. One level was success. And one level was transformational. So you can imagine which of those 4 levels you would want to be in or hope to be in. And so it spit out to me that I was in the frustration level, and which would be accurate in a lot of ways. And so I felt like God had begun to say to me last year that I'd begun to settle for a lot of things. I'd begun just to say, hey, this is the way it's going to be. Hey, this is the way my home's going to be, my church is going to be, my life's going to be, my salary's going to be, whatever it is. I've just begun to settle for a lot of different things. And so when I did this life score assessment, and it spit out that I was in the frustration level, and it broke down each of the 10 categories, and I could look at it and say very truthfully and factually that it was right on target with pretty much everything that was going on. I began to ask God, what do you want me to do about that? Like, I don't think you want me living in the frustration level. I don't think you want me living a day in, day out, where I'm constantly frustrated about a lot of different areas in my life. So what do you want me to do about it? And God began to speak to me, and God began to show me through a lot of different things, through Scripture, through other people, through some friends that I meet with and talk with, and they encourage me in a lot of different ways. And so God began to lead me to what I believe He wants me to do, and what I'm going to actually encourage you to do in 2018. And it comes down to this word, imagine. Imagine. You know what reality is, and maybe you're at the 120 level. If you're here at the 120 level, everything in your life is perfect, and everything in your life is great, and everything is just exactly how you would want it to be. Please come see me after church. I have some questions for you about how you got there and those kinds of things. But I think most of us have something that we're unsettled with, something that, isn't exactly right, something that we wish would be better. And so my word for 2018, and what I want to challenge you with this first month of the new year, is to imagine. Imagine what your life could be at 120. Just imagine what it could be at 100 or 80 even. Imagine what your family could be this year. You know what the reality is, but imagine what it could be. Imagine what your home could be, what your career could be. You know what the reality is today, or even tomorrow when you go to work. You know what the reality is. I want you to imagine what it could be. I want you to imagine what your church could be. I want you to imagine what your church could be. We've been a church now for 10 years, and one of the things that God really felt like He was telling me that I was settling in is just the fact we've been a church for 10 years, and so, this is it. This is how it's going to play out. God's really challenged me, and I'm going to be challenging our elders and our staff this year to do some things we've never even done before. And so some of you will be shocked. You'll be like, what? We've never done that before. You'll say that. But that's one of the things I believe God wants us to do. And I think God wants us to imagine what our walk with Him could be. Not necessarily what is it today, or what was it on January 1st, but what could it be? What could it be? Could it be better? Is it possible that your marriage could be better this year than it was last year? Is it possible that your family could be a better situation and you enjoy each other more than you did last year? Is it possible that you could grow in your relationship with God this year more than you did last year? Imagine what it could be. Hey, the scriptures tell us with God all things are possible, right? Yeah, none of you believe that. With God, all things are possible, right? So if you have some situation in your life today where you're unsettled, where you know it's not optimal, where you know it needs to grow, it needs to change, it needs to be better than it was, I'm going to encourage you to imagine what it could be with God. Studies have been done over the years, many, many years, and they tell us that our minds are the most creative before the age of 5. Now just think about that a minute. Our minds are the most creative, our imaginations are the biggest before the age of 5. That's why we believe there's monsters under the bed at night, right? That's why we believe fairies bring us money and rabbits bring candy and reindeers fly. I mean, our imagination under the age of 5 it's all out there. We would believe anything before the age of 5, right? Some of you told your kids things like, you can't drink that because that will make your hair fall out, and they believe it, even though it's not even near fact, but they'll believe that. But at age 5, our imagination begins to shrink. Before age 5, it's like this, and at age 5, it begins to do this. Slowly but surely, over time, our imagination we lose our imagination for the sake of reality and fact. And that is directly tied in these surveys when we introduce our children to school. Now, teachers, don't get mad because I know that you tell your students dream, be creative. I know you tell them use your imagination when you write that story. I know you're trying to encourage your students to be creative, to have imagination, to think outside the box. But the reality of the school setting, you have 30 kids in a room, all different learning levels, all different learning styles. There's certain content as a teacher that you're required to teach, and you have to make it through those things. In order to maintain some semblance of order in your classroom. You sit at a desk, you be orderly, you have notebooks, homework, projects, tests, all the stuff that you assign. And we all begin to lose our imagination for the sake of orderliness or formalness or whatever that we use. Now, it's no excuse for poor grades. So Cole and Logan, Maggie, I mean, you can't go to your parents and tell them you're a peacock, you need to fly. That's not what this is about today. But I want to encourage you in 2018 to imagine what your life could be. You know what the reality is today. Imagine what your life could be this year. And through faith, as Tucker prayed a minute ago, through faith, believe that God can help you in those areas. Believe that God can make that happen. James 1 tells us to ask whatever we would ask in His name, and He will give it to us. The problem is we ask whatever we want in our name. We ask what we want. We ask out of greed. We ask out of lust. We ask out of pride. We ask out of all of those material things instead of asking God in and through Him what He would have for us. So I want to encourage you this year to imagine. So each week we're going to look at different areas of our life and different areas of our church even that I want you to imagine with me, because this year I want us to imagine together. This year I want us to be excited. I can just remember the first few days of being a church, the first few meetings we ever had with our launch team, the first time we ever set up. We were meeting at Lake Joy, I think it was elementary then, it's now the primary school, but we were meeting there and we thought, well, it'll take us an hour or two to set up. We had met so many weeks, we just had it down. We just knew, boom. It took us about 5.5 hours to set up for the first Sunday service. And we were there so long, somebody ordered pizza and had it delivered for supper because we were all hungry. I want y'all to imagine with me this year what our church could be, what our walk with God could be, how our spiritual growth could be instead of settling for how it is and what it is today. That's my goal for this year, and that's what I hope to lead us through this year. So today I want to begin by asking you to imagine life in community. Imagine life in community. You may have a bulletin, and there's some notes on the back there, and you may want to jot those down. But I want you to imagine what life would be in true community. Now, I've given a definition today for community. You won't find this definition in Webster's, but I believe it to be very accurate. True community is this: being connected to others in such a way that our connectedness outweighs our differences. That our connectiveness outweighs our differences. In this room today, we have many, many differences. There's some in here today who are married, and there's some in here today who are single. There's some in here today who are parents, and there's some in here today who are not parents. There's some in here today who are grandparents. There's some in here who are full-time students. There's some in here who are full-time workers. We have people in here today who are employed, and we have some people in here today that are retired. We have all sorts of differences in this room today, but the desire of community is that our connectiveness outweighs our differences. We have several different communities already in our life. Some of them are forced on us or pushed on us, and some of them we have very little control over, and some of the communities that we're involved in, we have tremendous control over. The first community, and you really don't have any control over this, is your family. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard this as a parent. How did I get you as parents? And then the parent just fires back, how did I get you as a kid? I mean, you didn't get to choose your parents. And your parents, for the most part, didn't get to choose you. But it's a community that we have. It's a community that we're connected to. And it's a community that we live with day in and day out. Well, here's another community. Some of you have the community of school. Your full-time students, high school, college, whatever it might be. And so you have people, and you go into a classroom and you sit by these people, you have this teacher. It's a community that you're connected with, usually around a subject. And some of you go into that setting and just want to make it through and be out. And some of you go in there and can actually build long-lasting relationships. Some of you have the community of work. The people that you work beside or around, near, in the same building as. Even some of you in this room today have the same career field, but teach at different schools, teach at different hospitals, work at different companies, but you're still have those communities. And you could try to run away from every job every time you didn't get along with somebody. You could try to do that, but then you would rack up a really long work history that would start to go against your favor. But the one I really want to focus in on is your spiritual community. Your spiritual community. Because this is a community that you have 100% control over for the most part. Spiritual community. Now, there's some crossover in your spiritual community with your family. There's some of you, even in here today, that there's a crossover between your spiritual and your work community and your school community. Our youth group has several different schools represented in it and so forth. And so there's some crossover there. But what I want to talk about today is our church community. I want to talk about community, true community, within the body of the vine. Within the body of the vine. And so I want to give you 3 quick points, a few scriptures that emphasize those points, and then we have some incredible testimonies that I want you to hear later. The first point is this: God created us with a need for community. It is hardwired into you. It is a need for community. It's not an organ. It's not your liver, your kidneys, or your heart, or your lungs. You can't have an operation on it. But deep inside of you is a true desire and a true need for community, and God built you that way. God created you that way. In Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper who is just right for him." And we know that he did that he created the helper for Adam and Eve. And not only that, but then he told Adam and Eve to go forth and be fruitful and to multiply. So God instituted the community of family. God instituted the community of marriage. God instituted those communities for us. He created inside of you. If God would not have created Eve, Adam would have been miserable. Because there was deep inside of him a need for community. And Eve was just right for that. And one of the first things we see in the book of Acts, after Jesus Christ had hung on the cross and been crucified and died for our sins and was buried in that tomb but rose again, and he spent some time with his disciples even after that resurrection, and many people saw him. He finally ascended back into heaven, back to his Father. And one of the first things that happened among the believers was in Acts 2:42. It says, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. This was the first church community. It was the first vine, if you will. These believers got together and they devoted themselves to teaching of the Word. They devoted themselves to fellowship and just hanging out with one another. Men, I want to encourage you Wednesday night to be there. I won't be there Wednesday night because I'm hosting Family Promise that night. But men, I want to encourage you to go. We have a great time. We laugh. We talk. I'm sure on Wednesday there'll be some football talk going on at the table. But I want to encourage you to be there. They shared in meals and they gathered together in prayer. Hebrews chapter 10 says this. It says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some do. That lets me know there that there are believers who feel like they don't need one another. But it says, don't neglect our meeting together, as some do. It says, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. God has built inside of you, and if you're here today as a believer, he has built inside of the believer a true need for church family. And there are some people who go, I don't need the church, or I love Jesus, but I don't love the church. I thought about that this week. People who say, well, I love Jesus, but I don't love the church. That's like saying, I like you, but I hate your wife. Now, I wouldn't take too kindly to that. And I doubt many of you men would. But the church is the bride of Christ. So when you say something derogatory about the church, when you say something negative about the church, you're talking about Jesus' bride. And I'm pretty sure he doesn't take too kindly to that. But God has built inside of us a true desire for a church family and a church community. Here's the second point. Isolation is Satan's best tool. Understand that when Jesus died on the cross and when he rose from the tomb, he stripped Satan of his power. Satan is not more powerful than Jesus. Satan cannot do anything. He can't beat up Jesus. He can't back Jesus into the corner. He can't take Jesus down. And he knows that. And so one of his best tools is to get you alone. Think about this. When Satan came and was deceiving Eve, she was by herself. Would the story be different if Adam was standing beside of her? Would Adam have said, Eve, no, we're not listening to this. Eve, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, I don't know what would have happened. That's a hypothetical. But Eve was by herself when Satan came. Not only that, but think about this. Satan took Jesus up to be tempted. And when he did, he took him by himself. Jesus didn't bring his disciples with him. Jesus didn't bring his parents with him. He took him by himself to try to tempt him. And Satan does the same thing to you. He tries to get you isolated. He tries to get you alone. He tries to get in your mind and in your ear. And I have watched it play out time after time after time after time. When people begin to disconnect themselves from the church, when they begin to disconnect themselves from other believers, how their life all of a sudden begins to twist like this. Why? Because Satan gets in their mind and in their head. He tells them lies. He's known as the deceiver and the father of lies. And when there's nobody over here telling you he's lying to you, you may often find yourself believing the lies. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated. But two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better. For a triple braided cord is not easily broken. I had this thought this week. Even monks who live for years in a monastery without speaking a word to one another, they take a vow of silence, they are still in community with one another. Now, they may walk by each other and blink their eyes and say, man, this is horrible, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know about you. This is crazy. I'm thinking about getting out of this place. What do you? I don't know. I don't know, but they're in a true community, even though they're not even saying a word. But they're there with one another and working through life with one another. The third point is this. I want to encourage you to join our community this year. I want to encourage you to join our community this year. One of our biggest desires in this church is to create opportunities for you to have true community here at the Vine. We have things like life groups and men's groups and women's groups, youth group, and those kinds of things. And we want you to take part in all of those things. One of the reasons we do a men's fellowship is so we can just fellowship with one another, so we can laugh and talk and goof off and talk football or sports or whatever we may talk about, just to develop that community in here. We have life groups that are offered. And I know that ever since the day we started life groups, there's been people who will say, well, I'm just too busy. I don't got time for that. I can't plug into that. And I say it over and over and over. When you are not involved and engaged in a life group, you are cheating yourself and you're cheating somebody else. You're cheating yourself because you're connecting yourself off from others who could be encouraging you, like that Hebrews passage says. People who could pray with you, people who could help you along the path, people who could help you with your struggles, people who could help you with decisions you need to make. You are cutting yourself off from them. But you're also cutting a group of people off from you, from your life experience, from your heartache, from the things that you've experienced that you could encourage someone else through. There's some of you in here today that could look people in the eye and say, I've been through that and I've made it through that, and stick with God. You've been through that. You've been through that. So I want to encourage you to be part of community this year at the Vine. I want to encourage you men to be part of our men's group. I want to encourage you women to be part of the women's group. I found out today that I made a mistake on scheduling with the men's and women's groups. I've got them all offset. So we are going to meet this week for the fellowship dinner. And then in February, I'll get it straight. That was my bad. I screwed it up. I needed somebody beside of me going, Rick, you screwed it up. So I want to encourage you, men, to be part of that men's group. Ladies, I want to encourage you to come out to the ladies' Bible study. They meet twice a month. Usually meet up here. They do fellowships once a quarter. I want to encourage you to be part of that, to not isolate and cut yourself off from those groups. There's life groups that meet weekly that'll be kicking up probably back in February. I want to encourage you to find a life group and be part of it. This past year, 2017, early in the year, there was someone in our church that God was speaking to and God was dealing with, and God was prodding them along, and they didn't really understand all the ramifications of it and all of what do I need to do with this. And at the same time, God was prodding them. God was doing some things in my personal life with my health and my weight and my doctor visits and some things like that. And I needed to make some changes. And so God's sort of scooting this person along, and then over here, God's sort of scooting me along, and the two of us had a conversation, and as soon as they began talking, I began to say yes. As soon as they began to lay out, here's what God, I almost wanted to cut them off and just say, do it. Because I just knew what I needed as a person, as a human being, not only as the pastor of this church, but just as a human who wants to live a few more years. And so they began to make those things, and a community developed this year at the Vine called First Place for Health. And it developed here. I was part of that. I've been excited to be part of that, and so forth. And so today I want a couple of people to come and share with you a testimony of that group, of what it is and how it works and what it's. And I really appreciate Miss Pat for her leadership, because there was a lot of stuff she had to do every week to just get it ready for Tuesday night. So I appreciate her doing that. And that's community. I don't know if you've got that or not, but that's community. That's the reality of what could be in our lives, what could be, regardless of whether it's First Place for Health or whether it's studying the book of James or studying marriage or parenting, whatever the topic might be, that's community. One of the cool things we did was we took before pictures of our group and individuals and all that kind of stuff, and then we were supposed to take some after pictures, and I don't think anybody had a camera that night or whatever it was, but for some reason we didn't do it. But I did go ahead and take my after picture. Stephen, if you want to go ahead and put that up. So that's my after. And if you could do me a favor, send that to Monica's phone. Maybe that could be her screensaver from now on. That would work out really good. But we had a tremendous time. But I want to wrap it up here. Here's what I want to. Yeah. Just send that to Monica's phone. But I do want to encourage you, as we wrap this up today, to get your life score. There's the website right there. It's free. It's actually in the bulletin, so you don't even have to write it down if you have a bulletin. But just go on there, log in, and do your life score and see where that, because if nothing else, you should be honest with yourself. You may put on a fake grin for people here, or you may try to fool people at work or whatever it might be, but be honest with yourself. Be honest with God, because if you're struggling, He wants to help you. If you're down, He wants to lift you up. If you're hurting, He wants to heal the pain and those kinds of things. So I want to encourage you this week to get your own life assessment. But I want to close the message time with these verses that I found this week. In Acts chapter 2, verses 17 to 21. I want you to listen to this, because just this whole idea of imagine or dreaming of what could be. It says, Acts 2:17. Let me get to 17. There you go. In the last days, God said, I will pour out my Spirit upon all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. In those days I will pour out my Spirit on my servants, men and women alike, and they will prophesy. I will cause wonders in heaven above and signs on earth below, blood and fire and clouds of smoke. The sun will become dark and the moon will turn blood red before that great and glorious day of the Lord arrives. But everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. I want to encourage you to start 2018 dreaming, imagining. What could it be? Because regardless, we're still here today because there's people out there today, or maybe even in here today, who have not called on the name of the Lord, who are not saved today. That's why we exist. That's what we want to send you out into your world tomorrow to reach out to those people and so forth. So I want you to begin this year by imagining, by dreaming, by striving. It's not so much about a resolution or a goal, but just what could God do in your life this year? What could He do in your life this year? What could He do in your family, in your marriage, in your home, in your career? What could He do in this church this year? So many of us have just went, God, yeah, we're just going to settle for this. And I'm just not going to settle. And I'm going to encourage our staff and our elders not to settle. Our staff's going to come next week to our staff meeting, and the whole point is do not settle. Do not say, oh, my ministry is just going to be this, or we're just going to do this. We've never done that. Do not settle. And I'm going to encourage you, don't settle in your life either. Will you guys pray with me?